Hi, it's Paul here, and a few videos ago I talked to you about some of the potential downsides or blind spots of skepticism or a lack of belief in God. And this one I had in mind when I made that video and did that talk, but I decided to hold off on it for this one because I thought it really deserved its own devoted time and attention. So in this one, what I want to do is use the frame of an interview that Jordan Peterson had with a woman named Susan Blackmore. And Jordan Peterson in this interview kind of represents the believing side of a debate, and Susan represents the non-believing or atheistic side of the debate. And it's from the podcast Unbelievable, hosted by Justin Brierley. The whole interview is great. I definitely recommend going to watch the entire thing. And they do a great job in the dialogue. Susan's very likable, listens well. I think Jordan Peterson comports himself well too. So it's great from every angle. But the one thing that I want to draw your attention to in this video, and we'll look at a few examples, is Jordan keeps trying to point out that as Susan is describing her lifestyle, her approach, her thought process, and how she integrates her thoughts and her beliefs with her life, he keeps trying to point out this divergence where she says she believes one thing, but her actions are simply more consistent and aligned with belief. And we'll see a few examples, but first I wanted to show you this one clip that's also interesting, and so I'll play it with you and then we'll talk about it a bit afterwards.
Yeah, well, I see a university professor. Let's take Dawkins, for example. He's the sovereign, rational individual, but there's a wall around him. That's the wall, let's say, of his university, and then outside the university there's the wall of the town, and outside the town there's the wall of the state and the wall of the country, and there's just these concentric rings that are protecting him. And he can stand in the middle and say, "Well, I'm divorced from all that. It doesn't undergird me." It's like it undergirds you to a degree that you can't possibly imagine, and you're living on the, well, really it is the resources that have been gathered painfully and bloodily in the past, and saying, well, we can just detach ourselves from that and float off. It's like, no, you can't. You don't understand what you're talking about.
All that.
Okay, so I'll stop the clip right there. And in this particular clip, I think what Jordan Peterson is trying to illustrate is that it's fairly easy to, in our day and age, say that we can safely distance ourselves from the primitive religious beliefs of the past and think that we're going to be just fine, that we're still going to enjoy all the benefits of our modern society, all of the human rights that we enjoy and experience. And I believe what he's saying is that, well, those human rights and those privileges, the respect that's accorded to the individual speaker, for example, are the results of a long-standing tradition. And he talks about people who fought bitterly and shed blood and all these things for these very things that are rooted in a Judeo-Christian belief system, that the individual is sovereign, that the individual is sacred, that the individual is of very high value, and therefore that's been institutionalized in our laws as well as our informal rules of culture and expectations. And so it's easy to stand sort of on the mountain that's been built by other people and say, well, we don't really need this anymore. But that is the foundation upon which you are standing to say those very things. And that if you remove the foundation, it may be fine for a little while because there's a momentum that comes from the culture that's been grounded in that for many, many centuries and millennia. But eventually, once the foundation is gone, you are putting at risk all the benefits that have accrued and still exist up until this time. And so that's, I think, what he's trying to highlight here with this example and give a warning and a counter argument too. So I want to keep going from here because Susan Blackmore jumps in, and what she has to say next is also very interesting and relevant to this conversation.
That leads me to gratitude for all that we have. I mean, I recognize that. I recognize that nothing to do with any religious basis at all. I recognized that I could not come on the train here, have a really interesting discussion, meet Justin again, have a nice glass of cool water, without a load of other people doing it for me. That gratitude, which is one of the things that you quite rightly put into your book, it gives good place to it, and it's very important. That doesn't come from anything religious, unless you say because I was brought up a Christian it came from there, but I don't base it on that anymore.
Where do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from a recognition that I've done a lot of meditation. I've meditated every day for 30 years, and I think this has something to do with it. But it's observing the inner consequences of different ways of confronting the world. And I'm much more in recent years in the habit of waking up in the morning, even if it's raining in January in England, and looking out and going, and it's a feeling of gratitude, not gratitude towards God or towards anybody or anything, just free-floating gratitude. That seems to have a positive consequence. I set the day up better, and it's kind of self-perpetuating. It pops up again and again.
Do you think you can just have gratitude in general, or must gratitude always be given towards something and ultimately God?
That's a good question. That goes back to our discussion about acting things out. Like, gratitude is something you feel towards something. And you can say, well, I don't feel it towards anything in particular. And I would say, all right, well, the diffuse nothing that you feel it towards serves in your psychological hierarchy as your equivalent of God.
No, but it's gratitude. This morning, for example, I looked out and it was so green. We've had frosts and it's been white the last few days, and it was green this morning. And it was just gratitude to the universe, if you like. It's not.
All right, we'll pause there. So you heard what Susan shared, and again, she's a great conversational partner. I think she's acting in good faith and integrity here. And she's saying, like, yeah, you're right. We should be very grateful. And that, of course, I think our instinct and intuition is, okay, grateful and gratitude implies grateful to someone or something, not completely directionless or targetless. And so, a very simple common sense analogy would be in my family, if I'm grateful that my children exist and were brought into existence and that they're fed and taken care of and loved, that's great. Now, if I can actually apply quite a bit of that to my wife, who brought them into existence and cares for them, I think that's a proper use and target of that gratitude. If I simply leave it free-floating, I would say that's a falling short, at the very least, of the fullness of what gratitude is and should be. Or if I feel it towards her, but I never express it towards her, that also feels like a falling short of what gratitude actually is. I suppose I could use other words like contented, but this was the word that Susan Blackmore herself chose, gratitude. And I think she found it in good faith and honesty because she does really think it's important, and she has found in her real life, her embodied life, that her having gratitude is healthful and sane and all those things. And kudos for that. But again, I think our common sense and intuition kind of kicks in here with, gratitude is supposed to be towards someone or something, or maybe gratitude, isn't really appropriate. So her own words and testimony and values point towards imply a being that is the object of that gratitude. So I've talked with you in other videos and talks about when you see something working as if something is true, it's I think a pretty wise thing to just hold that in, at least as a possibility, hold it in some tension. Even if you're not willing and ready to accept it, at least acknowledge that there's some heft to something working as if something is true. Of course, it could be a delusion, or it could be in keeping with reality, coherent with the reality. And so this is a good example of that. When you feel gratitude and you find that gratitude is very important, I think it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. Who is the object of this gratitude implied? So that is the first example. And they go on and they have a lot more great conversation. I'm going to fast forward a little bit further in the conversation. Another example of something pretty similar.
No, when I hit tragedy is too strong a word. I think, but when horrible things happen to me, or I feel, or I read some terrible thing going on in the world, yes, those are tragedies going on in the world. My response is, nothing matters. It's all empty and meaningless. This is how the world is. Get used to it. Get on with it, girl.
That sounds like a very Zen Buddhist way of dealing.
I guess it is.
Meaning.
Well, it's a paradoxical way, though.
It is kind of paradoxical.
The first part of that is nihilistic, and the second part isn't. So how do you reconcile those two things? Why get on with it, girl?
Because, well, here's another thing. I've often done this with my students. Let's suppose you become nihilistic. Nothing matters. There's no point in doing it. I mean, I think we live in a pointless universe. What are you going to do? And I say to them, like William James in his wonderful thing about getting up in the morning, but that's a slightly different point that he makes there. But I say to them, okay, tomorrow morning, when you wake up, think it's all pointless, there's no point in doing anything. Now, what are you going to do? Well, actually, you're going to need to go to the loo. You're going to get out of bed and you're going to go to the bathroom. And when you're there, you'll think, actually, I'm hungry. I think I want to go down to the kitchen. I probably should put my slippers on. Why don't I get dressed? You go and have something to eat. And then you think, I'm bored. And you go to university and go into your lectures. And, we are not creatures who will just not do anything. To me, to go through that process, which I've done in the past a lot, and it's just natural now, is a very positive way of living. To accept the meaningless and ultimate emptiness of everything, and accept that this creature here, this thing, this evolved creature just will get on with life.
But you're not accepting the meaninglessness of it, even by going through those actions that you described.
You don't think so?
Not at all,
how
because
can you say that?
because you're acting as if those things are meaningful.
Yes, I am. I'm acting as though those things are
Are you
meaningful.
pretending that they're meaningful?
Pardon?
Are you pretending that they're meaningful?
No, I'm not pretending. My way of putting it would be that those meanings are constructed by myself and others.
They're personal
and they're
meanings rather
because
than-
Here, again, I think you got to give some credit to Susan Blackmore, the way she's participating in the dialogue, and she's just describing her life as she experiences it, fairly so. And she says that in her view, her non-believing view, atheistic view, there is no inherent or objective meaning to life. And yet, she says her counsel, in a sense, and her practice, her counsel to herself and her personal practice is to simply go through her day leaning in the direction of as if there was meaning. Again, there's that as if phrase that seems to be so key. And she says this also is her counsel to her students, that, well, maybe you find that when you wake up you have to use the bathroom. Go ahead and do that. Is it because there's meaning? No, it's not, but just do it anyway. Just do it anyway. Don't worry about the meaninglessness part. Maybe you're hungry and thirsty. Is that meaningful? No, it's meaningless, but just go ahead and just do it anyway. And that's what we will do and should do and just do. But it's very, you can see, you can hear. It is in a sense disconnected from the actual belief system. And it's not hard to see or to imagine that if you have a belief system where, no, there is meaning that builds up in our life, and it may reach even all the way down to things like, I need to go right now and use the bathroom, I'm hungry, and we probably don't think this way very often, but it's a deep point, because it may be the case that we are not very open to meaning presenting itself to us through something as simple as our bathroom needs or needing to have something to eat or something to drink. And I think it's the hardest actually when it comes to ourselves. So it may be the hardest for Susan to recognize that these little indicators, these little prompts that she has in the morning are actually related to meaning that she doesn't believe exists. And it's hardest, I think, maybe when it comes to yourself, and less hard if let's say you have an infant that is yours or that's you're in proximity to, and you see that this infant has needs, it is instinctive at the very least to take that seriously and to want to help that infant and meet the needs of that infant. So we take that a little more seriously than we take our own needs. But they're kind of the same thing. They're this thing that we didn't rationally conclude that these needs are meaningful or within the realm of providing meaning. They're just there. And we find that in a very embodied, intuitive way, we start responding as if they are meaningful. It would be hard, and again, we have to be so careful in this conversation because people so easily hear an accusation that isn't there when this sort of reasoning is used. So to be as clear as I can, I'm not saying that Susan Blackmore or someone like her wouldn't be as responsive to those needs. My point is almost the opposite of that I fully believe that she would. And I believe this is the kind of person she is. But this is what Jordan Peterson's point is. What she's acting out as if there is meaning in the needs of her own life, even the simple ones. And then this is my point I'm adding on. And she would most likely respond the same or even better if the needs were someone else's, say that of a defenseless infant who is reliant on adults to have their needs met. It's like this meaning presents itself to us. But because we didn't choose it and we didn't rationally buy into a belief system that supports it, we can simply kind of keep these things in very different spheres in our minds, when in reality they are actually more the same thing than separate or compartmentalized. The needs that we would respond to are an indicator of meaning. But if we've just kind of ruled that out as outside the scope of the evidence that we will consider, maybe we will only consider philosophical or scientific evidence, then we can't see it. You're just screening out the evidence that's right in our face. So I think this is the point that Peterson keeps trying to make. And I'm not sure if it gets through or not, but I think that's what he's actually aiming for and trying to point out. So it's no criticism of her behavior or morality. It's instead an upward call to your actions seem to be very consistent with the sort of belief and understanding of meaning in the universe. But what you proclaim is more unrelated, if not oppositely opposed. So let me get on to the next section, next little clip I wanted to show you. All right, here we go.
Asking myself, do I live that way? What meanings does my life have? And if I think of something like, well, most of my striving goes into writing my books, and is that meaningful? And again, I have the same response when I ask myself that question. It's just what this body does.
Then you should listen to the body and stop listening to the thing that's criticizing it.
And what would the body say?
It would say, write your book and try to be as clear as you possibly can
that's
about
what I do. And that's
right,
exactly what I do.
What I said at the beginning is that the atheist types act out a religious structure and criticize it.
No, there's no religious structure. We come to this big question now.
Let me get to this question because I did want to get to...
But it's the same basic point. So in the last clip, it is sort of this negative, I believe that there is no meaning, but I want to act as if there's meaning. But here's the same topic, but in a positive spin, positive sense. Jordan Peterson is saying, oh, you write these books, you put a lot of time and effort and energy into wanting to articulate and establish the truth as clearly and as well as you can. And he really has a very high view of this. In fact, I'm not showing it to you, but later he goes on to really pay her very high compliments and the highest, most ennobling language I think he can think of to undergird what she is doing when she writes her books, and saying like, look, this is entirely consistent with what I'm saying, that there is meaning in life and that there is a transcendent grounding for that meaning and for other things as well. That when you write your books, you're participating in it, you're contributing towards it, and you are, in a sense, affirming and implying it that it is real. And she of course wants to distance herself from that, understandably, and say, no, it's just something that I do, and it's just what I do, but it doesn't really have any meaning. And okay, so the common sense, common face reading of that is, well, some part of you must believe that there is a meaning, right? I mean, I guess intellectually and philosophically you don't say that you believe that, but look at your actions. Your actions are almost communicating something to you about what you really believe. And once again, I think the modern human, the modern man, woman, just has this, we kind of have this block where if the evidence isn't something we feel like we chose or we philosophically opted into, we can be kind of resistant. If it's presenting itself to us in the form of our own bodies and our own lives, or the bodies and lives of someone else, we're very skeptical, and we don't really receive that as even meaningful points of data or evidence. And I think that's not because it isn't decent evidence, but more so has to do with our mentality and I don't know, some form of distrust on that level. And so I think this is what, again, Peterson keeps trying to point out. Susan Blackmore's not really having it and looking for other alternative ways to explain that. But, I do appreciate her honesty. She, in many cases, she just says, like, well, I don't have a reason. I just do it. And that the word for this, by the way, is called performative contradiction. Meaning that you can say what you believe is one thing or set of things, but if your actions clearly point in a different direction, then that is a contradiction of sorts. The contradiction between what you say you believe and what your actions show that at least part of you really believes. And this is the thing that the conversation between Jordan Peterson and Susan Blackmore keeps coming back to is, as she's in good faith describing her life and her approach, he just keeps pointing out, like, okay, are you hearing what you're saying? Because what you're saying you do is very consistent and in keeping with an inherent meaning to the universe that is grounded in the transcendent, something above and beyond us, which people often give the name God. But it's something beyond and something transcendent, and it does provide meaning into your life and into the universe. And she doesn't really have, this actually I would say is to her credit, she doesn't try to blow that off or give a very false sounding explanation. She simply says, well, that's just what I do. And okay, that's what you do, and that's also what she counsels her students to do. And that's fine. It's okay. I would actually rather have, my opinion, I would rather have someone act in a way as if there's meaning in the universe and say they don't believe in it than the reverse. Or even somebody to be very consistent and say, I don't believe in any real meaning. I don't believe in any objective and binding morality. Therefore, that's what I act upon. And I feel free to make whatever moral choices I want. And you can fill in the blank with what that could be. That's horror right there. That is a horrifying possibility. And there are some, although I would say very few people who follow that way of being and that line of thinking. Thankfully, most people who don't believe actually show by their actions in many ways that well, at least that their actions are very much in line with a belief in a transcendent grounding to what is real, what is meaningful, what is moral, what is a moral outrage. And, well, thank God for that, because the alternative is horrifying. So this is just an additional thought. I wanted to add it to that list of just potential downsides or potential blind spots for those who are quite skeptical. And this goes really for anybody. Any of us can fall into the trap of performative contradictions. And it is, of course, up to each individual to try to be an integrated person and to have our actions and our beliefs cohere and line up with one another. I hope that is helpful, something to think about in terms of performative contradictions as a potential drawback or blind spot for those who are not believing or quite skeptical. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll hope to see you next time.